Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this evening's August 16th Committee of the Whole. There are 4 items on this evening's agenda. There are no signatures on the sign-in sheet, so as a result, we will take each item individually. Staff and City Council will discuss them. Once that's done, if there's straw votes or questions, we will address those and then move on to the next item. Beginning with the first item, we have the Sustainability Plan recommendations from the Environmental Committee. For this, I'll defer to Alderman Sonoyka.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm really excited to talk about the Sustainability Plan today because it was actually an initiative that was brought forth from a resident in Ward 1. He has a PhD in chemistry and over 30 years of experience in that industry and continues in the field today. And he approached Alderman McHale and I after reading through our comprehensive plan, and it had questions about targets and milestones related to sustainability. So I actually invited him to become a member of our environmental committee to explore this further. And he pretty much lived the motto of our city, which is progress through participation, and did work with our committee in addressing this issue and this topic. So a lot of this work, I do want to thank him today for all of his efforts. One of the main topics that we addressed first and foremost was that when we're talking about sustainability, it's more than land use or water use. Sustainability is about making sure that we are meeting today's needs without compromising the needs of future generations. So because of that, it's very comprehensive and it touches all of the strategic points of city planning that we already look upon. So, or that we incorporate, similar to our capital improvements projects planning, which we're going to talk about later today. I think that's our next item. So very similar to that, a sustainability plan is a planning document that helps the city make strategic and smart decisions about where we want to allocate resources, where we want to allocate staff time. So taking all that into consideration, the committee looked into past council actions regarding sustainability and noted that in 2017, the council at the time had passed a resolution endorsing the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus Greenest Region Compact, which we have before us today on the screen. So this is a framework that basically assessed sustainable initiatives throughout the community, pulled them together, and then created a framework that helped pool all of the resources and efforts that our entire region, all of those that are members of Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus. So this is a regional initiative, and the council in 2017 had endorsed it. Since then, we have not had really any other touch points regarding the GRC or the Greenest Region Compact. So ultimately, we saw this as an opportunity when we looked at the framework. So I do want to take a look at that framework today because it essentially gave us a nice starting point of where we could go. So the Greenest Region Compact looks into all of these different components of sustainability, which fell into our definition of sustainability and what we wanted to work with, which was really comprehensive. So you'll see on there things that are very familiar and important, like water, which, as we know from our colleagues in Michigan, that this is an essential function that the city should be interested in pursuing, but also things like economic development, which maybe you wouldn't consider to be an initiative that comes out of the Environmental Committee. So with all of these different components, the framework tool itself actually lists a bunch of different objectives and goals, and within their different strategies, and all of those different strategies, so what you'll see on the screen here, are all listed as very specific items within particular goals and categories. And all of the little boxes that you see to the side are essentially the assessment of whether or not this is something that is in progress, something that we want to pursue, or something that we would want to defer to later on. So when we had some staff members who were present at the Environmental Committee meetings, and when they saw some of these items, they said, oh, we've already done this, or they said, we're currently doing this. And so the committee quickly realized that actually completing this assessment would be a beneficial exercise for the city to have a snapshot of where we are and what we have already accomplished, and any projects that we might want to then continue moving forward on to create our own sustainability plan and to make sure that we're consistent with our neighbors. So the recommendation from the Environmental Committee is for council to support staff in their collaborative efforts to pursue this assessment And because it goes across 8 or 11 different items, it does require a lot of collaboration between the different departments and different staff, which is also why council action would be necessary to pursue this. Even when we talked with staff, they said, oh, this makes sense just to do right now, but we want to make sure that staff understands that they have the support of the council to pursue this. Ultimately, this will help us have a more prosperous city because we're then investing in initiatives that are going to grow opportunities for us and make sure that we can continue to have sustainable growth for our community. So we also looked at a couple of other different sustainability plans from our neighbors. So we looked at some like Hoffman Estates, which were very long and had lots and lots of descriptions of the history of the city. So I think this one has lots of pictures as well. So, but it was really large and bulky. But when I spoke with City Manager Rob Sabo, who actually has quite a deal of experience with sustainability plans, he was able to provide some insights from Highland Park. So, Manager Sabo, if you'd like to talk about your experiences, I think that would be helpful for the council.
I'd be happy to. Thank you, Alderman Snuka. Highland Park, when I was an employee there, worked on a sustainability plan that was actually built off of the Greenest Region Compact framework. And the beauty of the framework is it is a compiled tool putting together different sustainability plans from across the Chicagoland region and aggregating it into one functional document that allows you to easily go through and determine which projects you want to incorporate at this time, which projects you may not see being something that meets something that the community is interested in, or projects that you want to defer. So in Highland Park, working with the Sustainability Advisory Group, resident outreach, and staff and the city council, the sustainability plan was created, and as you can see here, it is organized into categories exactly as the Greenest Region Compact is set up. And so the approach that Highland Park took was to do a 3-year. Back in 2010, the city hired a contractor who came in and created a 30-year plan. And within 4 years, that became obsolete, and there were certain pie-in-the-sky types of projects that the city quickly determined either weren't feasible or technology evolved and changed. And so the city decided to take a shorter, nearer-term look at sustainability, which, A, allowed us to continue to revisit it regularly, so it wasn't the type of plan that gets put on a shelf and collects dust. This was a very active, breathing plan that had annual updates. It required us to measure our accomplishments. So one of the initiatives in Highland Park was to measure greenhouse gas reduction, and that was just a mechanism by which the city could ascertain how well they're meeting their sustainability goals. And so each year, the Sustainability Advisory Group, and through a report to the council, updates would be made to the plan, and ultimately every 3 years a comprehensive update to the plan document would occur. So here, for example, in the communication section, you can see 2017 through 2019 accomplishments. One of the things Highland Park did working with the MGP GIS consortium was creating a crowdsourced map. So residents could actually log into this map if they installed a solar panel, if they had rain garden, or they had a pollinator garden. They could actually drop in a pinpoint, take a picture, and upload information about their garden. And if they wanted to provide contact information for others who may want to do something similar, that was all online. The nice thing was that it didn't take staff time. This was something that was a crowdsourced map, which is a unique product of Esri. Looking ahead, there were different types of opportunities and actions that were identified, some of which you can see here were waste-related, so reducing the amount of waste being hauled to landfills versus the amount of waste that's going to recycling. So the city really worked hard on establishing some realistic, attainable goals, and measured and benchmarked ourselves against achieving those goals, and that's how this plan is laid out. The document is available on the city's website, so feel free to check it out in more detail.
Thank you, City Manager Sabo. And so at this time, essentially what we're looking to do today as a council is determine if we wanted to provide staff the support to pursue this assessment, to make sure that we not just pursue this assessment, but also the recommendation from the committee was to place a timeline on it, or a due date, since while the council had shown that they were in favor of this idea, because that resolution did not have any action steps or milestones, we're talking about it again in 2022. So the recommendation from the committee was to complete this staff assessment by the end of the year, or December 31st, 2022. So today what I'm looking for from council is, one, the support generally, and then two, their thoughts on that particular deadline for staff. And it's, and I think that Manager Sabo might also be able to provide some additional information on whether that's a feasible date. I believe the committee, that again is their recommendation, but it is a recommendation without the understanding of our staff, complete responsibilities of our staff.
Sure. And I'm happy to speak to the timeline. So, again, as I mentioned before, given the way that this is laid out, staff could schedule a meeting for a few hours and bring in the stakeholders from across the departments to walk through all the different items that are outlined within the GRC framework to do what I would call a cursory recommendation and review. I believe that we could get that done before the year is over, and at least have a what I would call a shortened punch list of items that the Environmental Committee can then dive into in more depth in 2023 and begin to evaluate in more detail, setting goals and objectives and timelines for those specific strategies and objectives. So as far as going through this document and identifying the different objectives and strategies, certainly I think we can do that. Some of these are very, as Alderman Snoka alluded to, very quick yes or no, or maybe we've already done it. So it's just an exercise of getting together, going through the document and identifying which ones are recommended to move forward and which ones maybe we put on hold for whatever reason we provide.
Thank you. At this time, are there any questions from the council? Okay. Seeing no questions, I'm going to give this back to the mayor to proceed.
Sure. Thank you, Alderman Sonoka. Thank you, Manager Sabo. Looking forward to seeing this strategy come to fruition. Appreciate the work you've done historically, and I appreciate the work the committee is currently doing and will continue doing moving this forward. As Alderman Sonoka alluded, show of hands of those in favor of having staff continue focusing on this and the deadline, so that way the Environmental Committee can go ahead and pursue future objectives with the plan. Those in favor? It's unanimous in support, so that's a good thing. Thank you.
Thank you.
If there aren't any other questions, and getting that direction out of the way, we will move on to the second item this evening, which is the fiscal year 2023 through fiscal year 2027 capital improvement program. And for this, we'll begin with Joellen Charlton.
Thank you, Mayor and City Council. This will be a tag team effort between myself and Molly, and we will also have Wasim come up based on some requests for information that the Capital Projects Committee had for an update on the ERP plan. So he'll come up at the end. But we do want to present our draft capital improvement plan to the group tonight. This is for the 23 through 27 years. This process was established back in 2010, as near as I can tell from the documents that are on our city's website. So what you're seeing tonight will look very similar to things that were created for the city in the past plans. The thing that's different about this planning process this year is that the three people mostly involved in putting it together didn't put it together last year. So we did have a process of struggling through some of the access databases, which we hope will be the last year for that, as well as some of the spreadsheets that feed into it. So between the new ERP that will be functional, we're going to hopefully be able to make that crossover and make this process a little bit more seamless for next year. And we're looking forward to that. The goal in going through this process is to look at basically all of the 200 line items that make up our capital projects and bring it up to speed, bring all of those projects up to speed to determine whether they have been completed, whether they're on schedule. We had to evaluate a system of deferrals that were necessary for a variety of reasons, including some of the factors due to COVID and supply chain issues, especially in our vehicle replacement committee. Our ability to purchase, order projects and get them in is significantly delayed. And so we find ourselves having to delay big capital purchases for a year or more just simply because we can't order the equipment. So all of that kind of feeds into our need to move these projects around. It does give us the ability to look at that on an annual basis. Obviously, we spend a lot of time with both the Capital Projects Committee and the Vehicle Replacement Committee over the year going through these projects. We do pay attention to where we're at this year because it affects next year. And then it also gives us that look forward for our finance director to evaluate how these projects are going to impact our policies on our local fund, on our fund balances. So with all of those things coming in together, we have a draft plan for your review tonight. This first slide indicates where the money goes. This is a familiar slide to you. We generally have the same 8 categories that are in prior plans, and you can see that we're spending about $10.7 million on capital purchases planned. When you look at the top 2 categories, historically, they are this year and in past years are the street programs and the vehicle replacement program. So while this provides us with a 5-year look ahead, we do focus on planned expenses for next year, which is what this shows, and those percentages are pretty consistent, as I mentioned before. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Molly to kind of step through each of the individual funds. There are slides embedded in there which talks about some of the top 2 or 3 projects in each category. She'll run through those slides. And if you have questions on those, you can either interject them at that point or save them until the end. And then we do also have time at the end of the presentation for Wasim to come up and go through the ERP questions. So I'm going to turn it over to Molly.
Thanks. She's a little taller than me. All right, so our next slide, this should be familiar. It's the debt service slide. Really, the importance of this is we do have debt. It is, coming down for the city overall, and this is kind of how the debt is laid out all the way through 2039. This impacts the utilities fund when we're looking at capital projects, because some of the debt is related to the utilities fund. But when we go through the fund statements, we'll go through this a little bit more. But as you can see, we had a lot more debt at the beginning of this, right? And then we start to scale down in the outer years, which is a good thing. So we have our local roads fund. Looking at this fund, I put, in your packet, you might be able to see this a lot better. It is a very busy slide. It's the fund statement. So feel free to follow along on your paper or in your laptops, because the importance of these slides is really to show you, we looked at the revenues, we look at the expenditures, and where are we landing. So for 23, kind of the blue highlighted column, and all the fund statements are in this very similar format when we get to these slides each time. The blue column will be the FY23 year, the year we're looking forward to. And then I kind of highlighted what we're anticipating for 23. So revenues in this fund are anticipated to be $2.6 million, and expenditures are more at $3.2 million. So when we look at this fund from actually FY21, the very first kind of red highlighted estimated fund balance there, your 21 audit, we actually have a negative fund balance. So we're spending more than we're bringing into this fund. It's anticipated we're going to end our current year in that same kind of negative position, and it goes further out through the 5 years of this fund. The revenues in this fund are really, you have 2 property tax levies. One is the county's road and bridge, which is about $220,000 a year, and then you have the annual street program levy. On the graph, it shows you kind of the dollar amount, and then on the side, I put kind of what the per capita is per resident this levy is. So you can see we have an increase for 23 on your annual street levy, because when we discussed at the budget parameters about the property tax levy looking at a 2% increase, we've scaled back to that 1% increase, but $100,000 of that 1% increase is added to this levy specifically because of the structural imbalance that's built into this fund. And we do assume that there's about a $50,000 increase in that levy. Clearly that it's helping the fund balance, but it's not solving the the problems here. So the next thing in our local motor fuel tax, this is not the state motor fuel tax, this is the city's local motor fuel tax. We do have that revenue also going into this fund. It is trending up a little bit. The per capita is on here as well. And the one thing though is it does decrease 2% in 23. And part of that is I looked at the Illinois Municipal League, and they're very good at projecting kind of state share revenues. So even though this is our local motor fuel tax, it trends very similarly to the state motor fuel tax, right? It's the same purchase. And they were projecting that motor fuel taxes should trend down 2% if gas prices remain above $4. So this one is one we can watch, but even any kind of adjustment between now and when you adopt the budget isn't going to be very significant. It might bring it back up to the $12.40 per capita kind of rating there, or, it'll move it a little bit, but we can continue to watch the state and the local based on how gas prices are going. So right now, as they're going down, there is potential for this revenue to come in better than we have estimated right now. And then you also added in FY 2018 the natural gas tax in place of the vehicle stickers, and that is trending up again. So it did go down in 22 and 21, but as we're looking at receipts now, it is trending back upwards. So that does help. Your big key projects, your expenditures in this fund, you have road resurfacing at $500,000, Quentin bike path, $250,000, but we do have a grant for $60,000. Hicks bike path at $231,000 with a grant of $198,700, and Wilkie Road resurfacing. What we really need to do, there's multiple ways we can look at the structural imbalance for this fund and address it in different ways. You can look at, like this includes, an increase in the property tax levy that could help. You can look at where we have our, local motor fuel taxes. So you can look at the revenues and see how you'd like to adjust that. We could also look at the expenditures and see if there's projects we could, maybe something scheduled for 24. Can we delay it to 25? Or as we've been doing, and I know that Public Works is trying to be more progressive right now, is finding more grants for the projects we have on the table. But again, the grants are very helpful, but in the fund statement, you'll kind of see we'll have a big year in expenses, but then you'll have the grant revenue a year or 2 years later. So most of them are reimbursement, so we don't receive the revenue for that until after the project's done. So there's a little delay, but any grant is helpful, I think. And we can also look to the general fund, because we've done some, fund transfers. So there's different things here. Then after we met with the Capital Projects Committee, we did shift some funding to make improvements to this fund of about $385,000 of the road resurfacing program for the out years from FY 24 to 27, and we moved that to the motor fuel tax fund. So we have done some altering to this fund to try to get it in a better position overall. So the next is kind of the state motor fuel tax. Again, the revenue is based on, looking at the IML projections. This is trending down, but there was more than one kind of revenue source in this fund. So you have your traditional state motor fuel tax. It has come down, as gas prices are high, we're just not spending as much. So there's the anticipated decrease in this revenue. But we also had the Build Illinois funds. That was $1.6 million. Over 3 years we received the revenue, and we have the 2 years where we're spending the 1.6. So that funded projects with that kind of temporary revenue, which was great. And we also have the transportation renewal funding that started. And so that one actually is trending pretty steady for this city. If we go back to the fund statement, you can see it's actually been building up a little bit. We have it leveling at $380,000 per year, and that's essentially what's covering that road reconstruction that we've moved to here from the local roads fund. So there could be potential growth in that as well that I just don't have anticipated in this fund statement just yet. So the key projects for MFT, like I said, we have the road reconstruction there, and we also have continuation of the road resurfacing program. The 911 fund, originally when we looked at the property tax levy, we had included some increase for this fund and these revenues. I've backed that down to leaving it level because we are, we need a more current estimate for the radios and what expenses we're going to see in this project. So that will really be updated in time for us to look at the budget next year. So at the moment, the 911 fund has a healthy fund balance. We do have a build for expenses in this fund. It's covering what we have anticipated over the 5 years. So we've left this levy flat. And that little bit I did have included here at the Capital Projects Committee was $25,000 increase. That was shifted to local roads, and that's where we get to the $100,000 increase on that levy. Vehicle and Equipment Fund. It's really it's doing what it's supposed to do, right? So we look at this fund, we save the money, right, for our vehicles and our equipment, and then we spend it in years, and our fund balance goes down, but then as soon as we get to a year we don't purchase as much vehicles and equipment, we build back that fund balance. So we're in a trend here where we're seeing a few years of large expenses because you have fire truck. Actually, in the current 2022, we had to move up to purchase a fire truck. The supply chain here is we put the order in for the fire truck in 22, and you get a lot more benefit if we prepay and get that on the books and sign, but it won't be delivered till 2024. So that's the kind of the new world in the vehicles. So we have a fire truck included there, so you see a larger expense, and then we also have a ladder included in 2024, which will fall under that same model. You have to buy it in 1 year, and it should be delivered in 2. Hopefully by that time it'll come in sooner, but that's kind of our projected plan, is the delay in the vehicles. And then equipment is also increased, and Director Khan will be up because we do have a lot of IT projects specifically related to our enterprise resource program. So you can see just visually on the chart, that fund balance is your line part of this, and we start to build back up, and right after that I think we have another fire truck scheduled, so it'll go back down again and do kind of what we want to see when we're looking at these fund balances. So the big projects here, we have a street sweeper, $325,000, and this is all for 23. Front load refuse truck, $310,000. Software replacement at $250,000. That's that enterprise resource planning, or ERP for short, and the dump truck for $225,000. The next fund is our building and land fund. Again, this one is a chargeback fund, one of our internal services, and we are building the chargebacks up. So last year, or in our current year, the chargebacks or the charge services for the other funds that use part of this fund, we're down at $579,000, and I've increased it up to $1 million in the current year. So the other funds are starting to see more of a expense on their side to help fund this fund. As you can see, we do have a negative fund balance in the last 2 years, but then I think with how the projects are planned, we're spending a lot in the first 3 years, but the fund balance is kind of doing that trend again where we spend it down and now it's starting to build back up. If we went out probably past the 5 years, we'd probably come back into a positive position on this fund. So we can do some adjustments to this as well. I only have slight increases in the chargebacks for the out years. We can always see what leverage we have in the other funds to absorb, paying more fully for this fund, or we can again look at the projects and adjust in the out years. So your current projects for 23 is the City Hall update for $200,000, firing range repairs $200,000, and salt dome replacement for $200,000. I feel like that's a theme of this fund here. And then now we have utilities fund. This is similar to local roads. We're structurally imbalanced. Part of that is, the main revenue source, right, is that green bar on this chart is our charge for services. So that's the rates we apply to residents and what they pay for the utility services. It's remained the same. It's anticipated to remain the same in FY23. The dip you see in 22 has to do really to the decision that we kind of paused or froze the penalties and disconnection and late fees on your utility services. So there is a slight decline in that revenue because we're not going through with those, and we're not receiving the revenues on some of the accounts that remain in default. You'll see in our fourth item for this evening, we go over that, but this 5-year forecast assumes that policy goes back on and starts again at full effect in October. So it does assume that does go back on, so if we make a decision, something else, that would change kind of the outlook of this fund. But we're assuming it goes back up. And also, as a side note, that kind of dip in revenue here affects the refuse fund a little bit because you don't typically get a bill. The utility bill includes the refuse, or at least I don't, but I don't think it's very typical that people will pay like one line item out of 4 instead of the whole bill. So the refuse fund does feel some impact from this.
Molly, can I just jump in real quick? One item to note, if you do look at the trend on this chart, you'll see the dark green, that Jawa water purchase increases annually. And that increase is based on what the Northwest Suburban Joint Action Water Agency is purchasing water from the City of Chicago for. In the contract that currently exists for Jawa, the City of Chicago can increase annually the water rates charged to its customers by up to 5%. Historically, they have been doing so. We once again got a letter as a member of Jawa that they are going to be increasing that rate by 5% once again. Jawa, along with other customers of the City of Chicago, are planning on starting meetings with the city to renegotiate and restructure the way that those water rates are billed out to customers. But at this time, the numbers that you're seeing there are based on the trends and what we anticipate Chicago will continue to do based on the contract that exists between our water supplier, Jawa, and the City of Chicago.
Thanks. And the other parts of actually this graph, so the dark green is that water supply. You have kind of the mustardy color. That's your capital outlay. So we're really not spending a lot overall in this fund on capital. We are doing some, but your biggest expense really comes down to the water supply in itself, and then your operating expenditures is kind of that next light green above, and the blue is your debt service. So it's a small fraction of this fund, but as we saw in the chart, it starts to scale down as we get farther out, so that would have a positive impact here as well. So the projects here, I am going to hand it over to Director Charlton to go over.
Mostly, I wanted to update the council on a couple of these projects that were an issue for us in 2022. The utilities fund, it's an enterprise fund. We do get revenue for that, and we do budget for sanitary, stormwater, and water projects in the amounts for capital projects for 23 listed in the chart. I did want to talk about 2 projects in particular, the sanitary, in the sanitary line item, the Sunset Brookview, and in the stormwater, the Park Street Storm. So earlier this year, some of you might recall a presentation made by former Director Horn on the Sunset Brookview project, and really the reason I want to bring this up at this point is that whole process of the right-of-way and some of the things we needed to do in order to have that project constructed this year. We needed to pause and figure out that right-of-way issue. So it's a big expense that we had planned to spend in 2022. We are moving forward on a path with a plan to do that project in 2023, but again, that's a $600,000 expense that's being deferred to next year. The Park Street Storm Sewer project, I think through the easements that we've presented to council recently for the school and the park and the shopping center, was part of the reason that project needed to be delayed until next year. We did not anticipate needing to pay for an easement from the Jewel Shopping Center, which was $50,000, and we're going to move forward with that once we actually had a conversation with them. And other cost increases due to what we've expected and seen in all other bids that we've opened this year due to COVID, cost increases, supply chain issues. The biggest reason for this cost increase, though, is due to an error made by the consulting engineer on estimating cost. And basically, What it boiled down to is when they were estimating year one cost for restoring after putting the storm sewer in an area that didn't have streets, they took that restoration cost and applied it to phases 2, 3, and 4 that were put in under streets. So basically they didn't charge the street reconstruction costs for those later years. It's a pretty big, expensive mistake. We did meet with the consultants as well as the pretty top officials of the organization, and we talked through some alternatives and different ways to phase the project. The original scope of work included a phase 4 on Meadow north of school to Sigwalt. That was a little extra cost in the original proposal, but we have suggested taking that phase 4 out of the project because there was very little added benefit to that phase to the overall project. The other conversation we've had with the consultant is to work with us now that there is a higher cost to this project. There is a higher ability to identify grant funding that might be available. So already in the next week or so, we do have a meeting scheduled, or they actually scheduled this this meeting with the consultant to bring in the Army Corps of Engineers to talk to us about a grant opportunity for this project. MWRD is also another opportunity that we can explore, and again, these would be for projects or phases for this projects in years 2 or 3. The reason we believe it's important to move forward with this project, it is an important project. It obviously has a significant impact on flooding in front of the school and a lot of the people that travel in that area. There is also a lot of documented evidence of flooding in the rear yards along Park Avenue that we hope to address with this project. So I think that covers pretty much everything I wanted to with the Park Street storm sewer system. So the thing I didn't mention is that there is a grant, 2 grants actually, to the tune of about $385,000 in the first phase that the consultant has confirmed will be covered if we delay the project from this year to next year. We don't know for sure whether that grant would extend beyond there. We'd have to kind of go to that next step and ask additional questions if we wanted to delay it even further. But we did feel it was important to bring this to the council's attention because we don't want to move forward with phase 1 unless we know we're going to move forward with the last 2 phases. And we may or may not know whether or not those grants are in place. We have a pretty strong indication that they will be, but we don't know for sure. The other thing that the consultants did agree or tell us that they would move forward on is doing any of the grant work to request and follow through and track and monitor grants on this project at no cost to the city. So they do feel some responsibility in how it's impacting our capital projects plan, and have agreed to do that for us moving forward. So I know there's probably questions on that, but I do want to turn it over to Wasim first to give him an opportunity to go through an update on the ERP plan, because again, that's something that the Capital Project Committee asked specifically at their last meeting. Wasim?
Good evening, Mayor Council. First and foremost, thank you for your continued support on our ERP project. As you know, this has been going on for the last 5 years. It's a huge undertaking for the city, but it's definitely moving forward. We did have some unforeseen circumstances in regards to the pandemic and some staff changes and some issues with the vendor with their product not being updated. That caused some delays, but I'm happy to report that we are on track now with our implementation. So just to give a little update on the ERP itself, we'll go a little bit back in time. As you know, we first put the RFP out in 2016. We awarded the contract to Tyler back in March of 2017. We've already activated modules, which include the financials, general ledger, AP, budget, Tyler content management in April of 2018. Work orders went live October 2019. July 2020, we went live with our utility billing, cashiering, and self-service portal to replace the ePay, Illinois ePay we had online back then. Currently, we are going through implementing our InterGov application, which includes the online portal as well, our payroll implementation, ESS, which is our employee self-service, a part of the payroll module, with the tentative go live, well, pretty much firm go live in January of 2023. Outstanding modules for next year, which we are requesting the capital amount of $250,000, are for project and grant accounting, central property, Tyler Incident Management, which is Tyler 311, in addition to our contract management, which was approved last year. Staff is still gung-ho about the project. They are very actively using it. They are looking forward to activating the current modules that we are working on today. We are fortunate to have Molly with us, who has a wealth of experience with implementing payroll ERP. So right off the bat, she came in and had some great ideas to strategize on how we can make the project better. So that is obviously a very good thing. And that next year also will include report writing, as well as additional training for post-live for some of the modules we implemented in the past. And that's pretty much it for ERP. We did have a question on the budget. We are under budget based on the original budget that was approved back in 2017. So with the outstanding modules that we have, we should be on budget with the project that was originally approved.
Thank you for that. Thank you to all staff for providing your respective expertise on the capital improvement plan and the corresponding impact that it has on our city's funds. Are there any questions from the council regarding the breadth of information that we've received?
Actually, I have one thing to add.
Sure, Molly.
The ARPA funding is the first tranche. I just like that new word now, tranche. But we received that, and it is in the utilities fund. It is not included in this forecast for you to look at. It's just basically not counted in the fund balance. So we can look at that if at a later date when Manager Sabo brings back ARPA funding to discuss, using that to offset something in the utility. We should be getting the second tranche any day now. I keep looking for it. I am going to put that one, kind of park it in the general fund balance, because some decisions, I mean, just looking at the capital projects, there's decisions to be made on what projects you would like to fund and how you want to pursue it. But I know the original discussions of ARPA were all really related to utilities and water, so that could be part of the solution when we're looking at these different funds.
To that point, Manager or Finance Director Talkington, I know I don't want to get ahead of myself here, but with the capital improvements program and the eventual conversations that we'll be having as a council with the budget, will we be able to have these conversations about these costs impacted in the program and finding opportunities and identify avenues to go ahead and allocate future budgets for these instances?
For the ARPA funding?
Not only for the ARPA funding, but in general overall, as we looked at all the cost impacts with the capital projects or the capital equipment that we need, will we be talking about those within our budget conversations in the coming months?
Certainly, because there are, there's different avenues. We're putting together kind of a recommended package based on some of the feedback we've already gotten from council at the budget parameters meeting. But there still will be decisions on the table on, do we want to shift this or look at that, or even with, specifically the Park Avenue project, do we go ahead with it or not? And so those will come back to you as part of the budget discussion. So this is really kind of an early look at certain funds of the budget, but when we come back with the budget in September, we're right back with all these funds as well.
Perfect. Thank you. Any other questions?
Alderman Bessetti? My question was whether or not those funds were already in there or not. So,
The ARPA funds?
yeah.
Okay.
That was my question.
Thank you.
So thank you for answering it before I asked it.
You're welcome.
And if there aren't any further questions, then thank you again for the time and the information. We look forward to revisiting this.
Thank you.
This will bring us to the third item, which is the video game establishment license code enforcement. This is definitely a conversation that I'm looking forward to having. Manager Sabo?
Thank you, Mayor, City Council. I've prepared a brief overview presentation, which I'll run through and then open up the floor for any questions and conversation. The agenda packet includes a bit more detail, so I won't dive too deep into the details of video gaming cafes and the way that they're regulated here in the city of Rolling Meadows. But if anyone does want to look into the code, I've linked to the specific code sections within the staff report. Video gaming cafes are regulated in two ways here in the city of Rolling Meadows. A, by the state of Illinois, via the Illinois Gaming Board, through what's known as the Illinois Video Gaming Act. I'm going to refer to it in my presentation as the Act. The other way that we enforce is through the city of Rolling Meadows, and that's how we establish our local ordinances and laws pertaining to the operations of video gaming cafes here in the city. And there are different sections of the code that provide various regulations. The state of Illinois does not go as deep or have as many requirements for a video gaming cafe as we do locally, and that's under our home rule authority. We can establish land use controls as well as liquor licensing authority to set certain regulations to how these are to operate. Illinois just requires a liquor license and a few other stipulations. Locally, we require that a video gaming cafe go through the special use process and meet certain conditions, that they obtain a Class GC gaming cafe liquor license, and ultimately be licensed by the state with the gaming board. The video gaming cafes also, within our code, have specific regulations pertaining to where they can locate, distance requirements both to houses of worship as well as schools, also distance requirements between two locations. There are also very specific regulations in the code as to how many can locate within specific areas of the city. A total of 5 are allowed to operate at one time, so there's a restriction, a cap of 5 video gaming cafes or Class GC licenses that can be issued. An item that comes up frequently, I think, is a matter of discussion both with the gaming cafe operators as well as a question we get occasionally is the requirement to provide food. So in the city of Rolling Meadows, a gaming cafe simply can't just have a liquor license and operate video gaming. Beyond that, there is a requirement that the gaming cafe maintain commercial-grade cooking equipment. So that would be a commercial-grade oven, grills, fryers, ranges, essentially any sort of commercial-grade cooking equipment that could prepare made-to-order food the same way a restaurant would. In addition to that, as part of the annual renewal of the gaming cafe, the establishment is to provide a list of the 10 hot food items, and that's a minimum of 10 hot food items, which should be served at all hours of operation that the gaming cafe is operating. Notably, within the code, there's also specifics pertaining to what is and what is not a hot food item. The code actually provides an example of hot food items not being prepackaged or pre-prepared items. So, an instance, actually this is right out of the code, if there's a breakfast sandwich, taking that pre-cooked breakfast sandwich and heating it up in a microwave or on a stove is not really a hot prepared from scratch meal. Similarly, a pre-prepared item would be an example of that would be a frozen pizza. Simply throwing a frozen pizza in an oven, once again, does not constitute what our code requires for made from scratch hot food. Just as a note on the financials, so that the council is aware of what the revenues on video gaming cafes and video gaming generally look like for our community, the focus of this evening is primarily on video gaming cafes. We also have certain restaurants that have what we call a GA license, which is essentially video gaming as an accessory. If a restaurant is open for more than a year, they can come in and go through an analytical process with our staff to identify whether or not their application or desire to have video gaming is qualified as an accessory to the restaurant operation. Without jumping too far into the weeds on this, bottom line, looking at estimates, this is taking into account approximately what came in on the state tax revenue plus our video gaming terminal licenses and operator licenses. Total video gaming revenue estimates is around $253,000 plus or minus. Year over year, I included that on our tax revenue, January to August of 21, we were at about $107,000. This year, we're at about $111,660. So we're slightly tracking ahead but that certainly is subject to change based on habits and use of those machines. All this information is available on the Illinois Gaming Board's website. They provide reports that can be downloaded by anyone at any time. It shows all of the wagering activity as well as payouts and what the terminal operators and the licensees have taken in. With respect to code enforcement and the way that we ensure that our businesses are adhering to the code, certain city staff are enabled to conduct inspections. We can and do perform inspections, both pre-announced as well as unannounced. Those inspections would look at adherence to city code features. Health inspections are something that we do regularly, as well as adherence to the video gaming cafe requirements. If there is an instance where a violation is observed, those violations are subject to an enforcement mechanism which is specifically established within the code under a liquor license section within section 6-46. Given that our licensing structure here ties it to liquor, the city has two ways of going about enforcement. Well, three, I should say. One is to issue what's called a local ordinance violation, which is simply a citation that would be heard before an administrative hearing officer through the city's administrative hearing program. Under that approach, it is the admin hearing program is it's a civil proceeding. There's typically only a monetary fine that can be issued by the hearing officer, but the hearing officer does not have the authority to do anything beyond that fine, including revoking or suspending a license. Under the statutes of Illinois, those functions fall to the Liquor Control Commissioner of the municipal entity. In our case, the mayor serves as the Liquor Control Commissioner for the city. I'll refer to it as Commissioner for the presentation. But the way that the law sets forth and the way that liquor control commissioners operate in the state is that they have the authority to suspend, cancel, revoke, or otherwise terminate a license or impose fines on a license holder who's found to be in violation of any law or code or regulation of the entity that issued the license, municipal entity. If there is if the violation is handled through what we would consider a liquor commission hearing, that's what's considered a quasi-judicial hearing, because what essentially is happening is a licensee who's been found in violation potentially faces financial penalties or the possibility of their license being suspended or taken from them. So there's a due process component to this. Notably, if we were to send a citation to administrative hearings and have it heard through that process, we wouldn't be able to then go back through and send it through the liquor commission process as well, due to that potentially being a double jeopardy scenario, which is protected under the Fifth Amendment. So when we have a violation, we have to make a determination of which way we want to handle it. If it does go through the Liquor Control Commissioner hearing, that would be, as I mentioned, a quasi-judicial process. So there would be evidence presented, there would be testimony from individuals, both the cities, whoever was there conducting the inspection or observed the violation, as well as the representative of the licensee is welcome to attend that hearing and present testimony as well. Given that there is an opportunity for the licensee to appeal any findings of that process, there is a court reporter typically present. Ultimately, the commissioner hears the case and considers the information that's presented, the evidence, and utilizes any information that's presented to deliberate and ultimately issue a finding of either guilty or not guilty of violating the city's code. If there is a scenario where the commissioner does find that a licensee is guilty, the commissioner may then impose a fine, so that could be a monetary fine, and there is no specific guideline in the code, so it is a decision of the commissioner and solely the commissioner as to what level of fine to impose. In addition, the commissioner may suspend or revoke the license, and also require the licensee to pay for the costs incurred to hold the hearing, so court reporter costs or any legal time, etc. overall, after that, the findings and order are delivered to the aggrieved, or the licensee party, I shouldn't say aggrieved, the licensee, and then they would be expected to adhere, come into compliance, or through the judicial process may appeal the proceedings and go through that route. That, in a nutshell, kind of summarizes our approach. The final way that a video gaming establishment can be regulated is through the business license section of the code. Every business that operates in the city has a business license. However, there's a very specific limitation as to when a business license can be heard, and I did include the information in the packet, but it is primarily related to instances where there is a threat or a present health or public safety issue with respect to the operation of that business, and in those circumstances is where we would conduct a hearing to revoke a business license. And so I'm happy to answer any questions. One of the elements of this topic is, is there a best practice or a best approach to applying fines, fees, or penalties? And again, as I said, that's something that rests with the Liquor Control Commissioner's authority. In reviewing and kind of doing some outreach with area communities, there isn't a lot of enforcement history on video gaming cafes. A lot of the information that I was able to find occurred downstate mostly, and those were handled through the Illinois Gaming Board and their authority. In those instances, typically if an entity is found guilty of some sort of violation locally, we would provide the gaming board information about that outcome. And the gaming board would likely hold a separate hearing themselves and potentially conduct their own investigation into the matter, and that may impose separate penalties and fines. But in looking at what municipalities do with respect to Liquor Control Commission hearings, there's typically a progressive approach where a first offense may be a financial penalty, re-inspections regularly, and the licensee is expected to adhere to the code as they should. Subsequent violations can result in a much stiffer penalty and a suspension, and multiple reoccurring instances can incur up to a revocation. But again, I think there's a variety of different circumstances that typically are presented and taken into account in these hearings, mitigating circumstances, a variety of different scenarios that may come up. So there isn't really every two scenarios the same type of approach to the way that these are typically handled by municipalities. That's a general overview of our enforcement mechanisms and the way that the code is established. I'm happy to answer any questions about video gaming or our enforcement processes.
Thank you, Manager Sabo. I appreciate you bringing that and this information to the City Council this evening for discussion and exploration. As we know, you and I had preliminary conversations about potential violations with our video game cafes. Alderman Budmetz had brought it up historically on a matters not on the agenda regarding violators that close their kitchens prematurely during operational hours. And not to be too verbose with the history of our gaming license here in Rolling Meadows, but it started when both Alderman Budmetz and I were sitting on the City Council, and the Chamber of Commerce had come to the City Council and requested that we explore getting video game licensing to help keep our restaurateurs competitive with the surrounding communities. And with controversy, the council did pass that, and then there seemed to be a proliferation of gaming applicants that were coming in, and they were disguised as restaurants when in actuality they were just video game cafes. And then we established both the gaming accessory and the gaming cafe license as a result. And I don't believe that we've made the guidelines too difficult as a city to ensure that the video game cafes adhere to our rules or our requirements. And so personally for me, as an individual, I was opposed to video game gambling. The majority in my ward were in favor of it, and I pursued allowing it to pass as a result. But I'm not in favor of seeing multiple offenses or repeated offenses by a similar entity in consecutive times or trials. I believe we should implement a financial penalty the first time with successive monitoring thereafter But I also believe that we should have a very strict policy around this, given the controversy that the city council, the city, and the residents endured when we first brought this opportunity to the community, and explore something as strict as revocation by the second offense if there's a chronic entity that seems to want to skirt our guidelines. Any other comments or feedback from members of the council on this same subject? Alderman Sunoika.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I echo those sentiments as well. When we were drafting the gaming cafe or that GC liquor license, the reason that it has so many has such specificity is with regards to that same history of making sure that if there was an entity that wanted to come in and be a gaming cafe, that they needed to have some sort of investment into the community. And as a result, that meant investing in a professional kitchen, which would allow for another entity to come in at some future date if they were ever to leave, or if they were to ever abuse the practices of or requirements to have the privilege of having that gaming license within the city. And as Manager Sabo stated, we have a small number of those licenses, and I believe all of them are in use at this time. So if one of the gaming cafes is not willing to be compliant with the city's requirements, then it opens that opportunity for someone else. So I encourage the enforcement of those codes as they stand. One question that I do have for the city manager and possibly for business advocate Martha Corner is if there is any additional outreach that needs to be taken on behalf of the city for those entities, or if they're well aware of this process, and how or to reinforce how we intend to proceed with any violations going forward.
We certainly can notify all the license holders that the city will be stepping up their enforcement and conducting it regularly. The annual renewal license document requires them to sign documentation saying that they will adhere to the city's code and adhere to the video gaming requirements. And so by obtaining a license, they're already pretty much affirming that they will adhere to the code. So even if we don't issue letters, we still can conduct enforcement. But in the spirit of ensuring that they have an opportunity to comply with the code, we can take the opportunity to notify our gaming cafes and reaffirm the fact that they should be adhering, and there are specific requirements within the code that they should be following, and that we will inspect and ensure that they're adhering to those.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Sunoika. Alderman Besesi?
Yes, I echo what you say as well, Mr. Mayor. One of the things I'm thinking about as far as let's call them penalties or whatever, I worry about two different things. Different offenses may be more egregious than others. For example, you might have a cafe that is, the last hour of operation, they don't have food. Whereas you may have another cafe that doesn't have food the whole time. So I'm wondering if there should be some latitude given to the person assessing what the fine would be. That for a first offense, this is your range, and then second offense could be up to and including revocation of your GC or GA if it does turn into that. But I'm wondering if there should be some kind of a range and latitude given to the commissioner to do that. I would worry about setting precedents or the appearance of favoritism or something. But,
sure.
But I think it might be able to be worked out.
Yeah, and first and foremost, this license, the gaming cafe license and the gaming accessory license, is a privilege, first and foremost. To continue on the vein of your hypothetical, I think we would at that time take into consideration what is common or best practice with an institution that serves food. Does a restaurateur typically turn off the equipment 45 minutes to an hour before closing time, or is it standard that they keep it going up until 10 minutes before closing time? I think those sort of circumstances will be taken into consideration, but there were some blatant violations and obfuscation of the rules that we had set forth, and that's just taking advantage of the goodwill of the city distributing the license, of the council approving that license, and their disregard for their end of the bargain. And I think, yes, each one may be situational, but at the end of the day, it's a privilege. These are prized licenses, given the finite amount. And for me, I like I said, I don't want to tie staff's time or the entity's time up too much in this process. Adhere to the rules and everything is fine. If you can't, then you lose it. And so that's why I would like to limit the amount of penalty opportunities they receive. That's all I'm saying. Attorney Wolf?
Just to provide some background information with respect to how the code reads now, in the violations section of our liquor code in 6-46, it does say that fines can be levied in accordance with the schedule that's set forth in Appendix B of our code. So there is a schedule in Appendix B with respect to how fines should be implemented and the max penalties that can be assessed. So the City Council and City staff can take a look at that, and if any revisions are recommended to that based upon the discussion that you have today, you can consider that.
Yeah, that
Perfect.
place.
Any other comments, questions, items for discussion, Alderman Budnetz?
I'll take a second at it. The problem that I've encountered is not so much that I think that this was built for our restaurants, and it doesn't seem to be that it's necessarily, based on how this looks, necessarily assisting our restaurants greatly. That the largest shareholders or the largest wagering is at in places where food is not being served to a great extent by comparison to an out-and-out restaurant or an accessory. So I think the original intent of the law and the act is not being. It's not what we had hoped for, and so we've just created a new mechanism for gambling versus creating a way of helping our restaurants remain viable. So I'm for vigorous enforcement of those people within our municipality who are running gaming cafes and aren't doing it within the confines of our rules. I mean, I went to a gaming cafe and they told me that if I wanted food, there was a restaurant next door that they really didn't serve food. And so, literally, I mean, and so it's embarrassing because I know that wasn't our intent in any way, shape, or form. And so I don't want to see us, I don't want the people who have those licenses to have their employees have that attitude. That's really a wrong attitude for them to think that, hey, I'm just here to provide you with gaming, and if you want food, go next door. And so the enforcement has to be stepped up to the point where people understand the rules and follow the rules. And at this point, it feels like once they have the license, it's carte blanche in Rolling Meadows. And that's a really bad place for us to be at.
And to the sentiment you were sharing, I believe the operative word that we were throwing around at the time was that the gaming license was complementary revenue to the existing revenue that the restaurants had, and it was just to help the viability and the competitive nature that restaurants have in the community and the suburbs that surround us. But to this point, they appear to be taking a laissez-faire attitude about upholding our guidelines. And so to that point then, if we want to reevaluate what we have codified already in our ordinance, what are the next steps to open this back up and maybe reduce the penalty tables or sequence so we can have it be a little bit more strict than what we originally started off with?
Well, any amendment to the code would be via ordinance approved by the City Council. I'll leave it to Manager Salvo to determine whether or not that should be for another discussion at a committee of the whole meeting prior to presenting it to the City Council.
And that's perfect, because all I wanted to see is by show of hands if there's favor to go ahead and bring this either for a subsequent discussion at a future committee of the whole, or open it up and bring it to the council and we discuss it and just vote on it there. So a show of hands to bring this up. And Manager Sabo, I'll let you determine if we should bring it back to a future city council meeting, or a committee of the whole meeting for discussion on how we identify whether we reduce the amount of penalties or fees or tables or what have you.
Yeah, we'll do a little bit of research. I've already identified with City Attorney Wolf, there's one reference error within the code that we need to correct. So an ordinance will be forthcoming to the council nonetheless on this item, just for a correction based on a reference error that may have occurred when this was all amended previously. So I think a committee of the whole may be a good check-in, maybe at the September meeting, and then we can advance an ordinance thereafter.
Perfect, thank you. Any other comments, questions, or discussion on this topic? Yeah, Alderman Bessetti.
One thing I'd like to mention, I do understand the original intent on all of this, and personally, I'm not very much in favor of the GCs. I am somewhat in favor of the GAs. I would like it if for some reason any of the GCs fall off, that as a council we have an option of just lowering our maximum number at that point.
Okay.
That's it.
Thank you. If there's no further comment, then we'll revisit this in potentially September.
Yep.
And we'll move on to the fourth item of the evening, which is the reinstatement of late fees and penalties for delinquent water accounts. And again, for this, we'll turn it back over to Finance Director Talkington.
Thank you, Mayor. So I did not do a PowerPoint on this one just because I think this is really more of a refresher of where council has given staff guidance and to make sure we're still in the same direction and plan going forward. So council, back in January, had a committee of the whole and to discuss the council's decision to suspend all late penalties, non-payment water shutoffs, because we were looking at, a pandemic and what to do to assist the residents during that time. Staff came back to council in March to give a timeline on when to reinstate these policies, and that's kind of set up for this coming October. Really, as a refresher, there is we updated the amount that's currently outstanding. So when we looked at as of July, there was $178,000 outstanding, excluding one commercial property in our utility bills. And that one commercial property is delinquent by $117,000 on its own. This property we are actively working with. They are in the process of doing the formal accounts payable. It is a corporation, so it's taking a little bit longer, but we do have, email and kind of voice assurance that they are working on it, and they will be paying this forthcoming bill, so that one should clear up, hopefully before October, but we're really actively working with them to get this one paid. And I looked kind of back at the list just a little bit ago of the accounts that were on the list that council received in March of who's outstanding and the dollar amounts by customer ID, so it didn't tell you the names. So I looked at the first 17, so it starts at the highest amount down. The first 3 are commercial, they're current. The remaining ones, there's 2 more commercial, one's not current, one is. And the rest of the accounts are not current, only one. Out of them, one is current. The rest are still kind of sitting on this outstanding list. And it looks like when I kind of spot checked and I went down towards the lower amounts on this list, the accounts that had the lower amounts, it was probably just a delay and they seem to be more caught up. So I think we do have some rentals within that as well, because we talked, the memo discusses how rental got impacted in here as well. So within that kind of first 17, we still have quite a few of the residential that are still outstanding on that list. And so that was part of that kind of unintended consequence of when we froze the shut-off policy with the late fees and penalties is we had one landlord in particular come to the city and explain that, while their tenant was there during COVID, they didn't pay any of the bill. And according to our ordinances, the owner is the one responsible for our utility bills and refuse payments. So in that case, we had one landlord that is now, will have to take over the outstanding amount for that tenant since they're no longer there. In that case, it was over $4,000. So I don't believe that was ever a consequence that council thought. It was unintended. It came out, and I think that's one of the things we want to make you aware. I'm sure there's a few other landlords that are kind of feeling that as well, but I haven't heard from anyone except the one particular landlord. And also, as I brought up in the capital improvements plan, refuse is slightly impacted. So that bill includes the refuse payment. You can see that on the memo on page 2. I kind of showed where it's split out. You have the 4 things that we bill for: water, sewage, or water, sewer. I'm just going to combine sewer and garbage, garbage, recycling, and the stormwater. So typically when you get a bill, you pay the full amount due. You're not saying, oh, I'm just going to pay the garbage line and send us a check for a portion. So some of the refuse payments, when we reinstate the policy and we start working with the residents, we've sent out 2 notices to please get current or call us. We'll work with you on a payment plan. We have had some people come and take advantage of that payment plan, so they are starting to work down the debt that they owe, but that will also then, help fund some of the refuse fund there. We also have kind of transitioned to the Munis world, right? So we're in our new financial software with this. We have been for a while. This is one of our first modules. And some of what Director Khan was talking about before is we're seeing a shift in people's usage. So we are getting more kind of online access to people paying the bills. They get the bills electronically. They pay it. We've seen, some hiccups with the Tyler ID, but we're working with Tyler to see if we can make that work better, and so residents don't have an issue with that kind of, I would call it more of a multi-factor authentication type process. But we are seeing more people turn to online payment, and so we are getting kind of that direct pay payment model with our customers. And then we're jumping all over today. So at that March CAL, that's kind of where staff had updated with the plan to effective really September 20th. We're going to have all the outstanding balances. We've noticed everyone. We've sent out the letters. They've received first and second notices. If they didn't address it by the first one, they've gotten their second notice. There's a few people on that kind of second mailing that are new to that mailing, so they've received one because they were current the first time we sent it out. So we have notified people. We've put it out in the newsletter. It is on our website. So we've tried every kind of means to inform the residents that this policy is coming back, that shutoffs will begin. So really the key dates and the key information for residents is that you should have your outstanding balances either paid in full or call us. We'll work with you for a payment plan by September 20th. Beginning September 21st, that's when we'll start assessing the late fees. We'll start then, shortly thereafter, on September 26th, going around with the shutoff notices, right? We'll put them on your door, and we're going to shut off your services, and disconnections will begin in October. So that is the current direction that we have from council, and we plan to continue. So it's open for any questions.
Thank you, Finance Director Talkington. I appreciate that, because I do believe that the council, initially when we had the preliminary conversations about this, it was to offer relief to residents or businesses in the community impacted by the COVID pandemic. And then in March, when we revisited the subject, I think the conversation shifted to strategy and outreach, in essence, identifying those who are still impacted and need assistance, and the city can work with them to develop a plan. And then ultimately, how do we throttle back up and get back into gear now as we make our way out of the pandemic? And so if it sounds, or if it is that we have done what we can for outreach and communicate with those who needed it, and we've developed plans for them, to use that word loosely in quotes, plans, I think that's all we can do as a city for the residents. And again, of course, if they need help, they come to the city, and the city's willing to be flexible and work with them as needed. So I appreciate that and appreciate the information. Alderman Bessetti, you had your hand up.
Yeah. So residents who have worked out a plan with you already, that may not necessarily be over. Like maybe they had a payment plan and they were going to pay an extra amount through the balance of the year.
Right.
I would think what's going to happen is that their next bill will automatically, if they're, on that type of a cadence, they're going to get late fees. on stuff because they're still paying off past due.
Right, so late fees will start to become assessed as they incur more charges. So they'll still have a balance. The late fee will be lesser on that because they're making payments towards the balance that they had. And a lot of them, we've set out a plan where they get current in a shorter amount of time. But I think we've only had like 10 people work out the plan. So we've put it out there. We've asked people. We encourage. We've also recommended if people are really in dire straits and financial hardship, that they can go and do the CETA, thank you, and try to get financial assistance. We're aware one was approved. So we're really trying to work with them in any means that we can.
Okay.
But yes, there will be additional.
They can still, work with you on those types of things as well.
Right. So the bigger thing is if you have a payment plan, you will not get a shut-off notice and we will not turn off your service. So that then also incurs an additional fees for turn-on.
I just
so you're
noticed
stuck.
that particularly seniors on a fixed amount that might have fallen behind,
Right.
if they're getting their, whether it's Social Security or pension check or whatever, say the first of the month, I'm a little worried about September 20th. I mean, did the letter state in it that fees would start to be reassessed as of?
Yes. So we've had
September
the
20th
dates.
bill?
We've had the dates in the
Okay.
letters.
So then notice was given that that's going to happen. So it shouldn't be a surprise.
Right. We really did try to be as proactive as possible. Like I said, we had 2 letters directly addressed to each person on the list. So it went straight to their homes. It was included in the e-news that goes out and the paper newsletters if people still want the paper version, it's there. So and then it was kind of on I don't know what we call it on the website, but it was on the website fairly prominent where you could see it as well.
If I may, we also had a joint meeting with the townships as well as social services agencies in the area, just to talk about different services. And this was something that we talked about together, and we encouraged that as they work with constituents in the community, that they also work with households, as you've mentioned, senior households who may have a very low fixed income. Those are households that are probably eligible for the CETA program. I think some people just don't want to take advantage of it or for whatever reason have not reached out, but we've worked with the townships to ensure that as they hear from residents and constituents about the need or financial needs to help pay any sort of utility bill, that they certainly assist them as well. So it's been a joint effort amongst all the different groups. And one thing I also want to mention is that we did do this in bilingual, so we also sent out the letter translated to Spanish as well. So we did try to do everything we can to put out as much information for as many months since we had the original conversation back in January.
Okay, so then the plan would be, they'll get their bill from the September 20th
Correct.
or whatever, and then if that bill is then they're not cut off by the time the next bill comes, then they'll get a disconnect notice.
No, it's if they're not caught up by the September 20th bill.
Or have a plan.
Or have a plan, or we're aware they contacted CETA. So there is some delay between contacting them and CETA providing the payment, but we hold off on any action when we know they've been approved and they're going through that plan. So they have those kind of means to stop any shutoff before we begin doing shutoffs in October. So it's really that September 20th bill. You should either be current on a plan or working with CETA on financial assistance to avoid the kind of shut off and late fees beginning.
Okay, so it really encourages people that if for some reason they're not going to be caught up by the time that September 20th bill is due.
Right. Call us.
They need
We'll
to
help.
call the city and then something could be worked out.
Correct.
Okay, I just don't want to have a mass, all of a sudden all these people start getting turnoffs. And I believe looking at the list, the majority of the people were it was like one payment or 2 payments.
Right.
behind. So it's doable. So, yeah, okay.
Thank you, Alderman Bessetti. Alderman Sunoika?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So during staff's investigation and collaboration with other services, in the past, when I spoke with former Director Horn regarding shutoffs, he had mentioned that the incidence of shutoffs was really low for residential properties. He didn't give me a statistic as to what the percentage that was in the past, but going forward, if we have information for households that are expecting shutoffs or are incurring or will have a shutoff notice, what is the city's procedures or policies with connecting those households and individuals with the CETA program or others that you identified?
So the notification that we post, so there's typically a notification post at the home. We can add in and provide the CETA information with that posting so that they are aware and can make contact with that entity. Typically we mail and then hand deliver those types of postings. So we make every effort possible to make sure that the resident at that property is well aware before we ever come in and turn off water that it is forthcoming. And there is, again, that due process period before as well.
I appreciate the litigious, the process that's in place there. In the past, having discussions with our social workers, we have 2 in the city. They have stated that although we have programs in place, there are barriers for people to then participate in those programs. In some cases, they don't have an ID. Is this something that we could, do we have the bandwidth with our social services division in order to be able to, or not division, rather the 2 social workers that we have, to be able to include this in their scope of work, or is this out of their scope at this time?
They're well aware of the program, and so that was part of that meeting. They actually facilitated the meeting with the townships, and this is part of the toolkit for them when they're working with families in need.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Sunoika. Any Alderman Budmats?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So is our ERP system advanced enough that the ID for the water customer is tied to any potential transfer stamps being issued for the sale of a property?
I think there's a way to connect them. I don't know if we're utilizing that. Do you know, Director Kahn?
I know we check for that, but whether they're directly.
We check for water bill, outstanding water bills before we issue a transfer stamp. We'd have to take a look and see if that actual automation is built into the ERP.
Just to eliminate any possible errors in the step, I suppose.
I will say the front desk staff in finance, whenever someone comes to pay, whether it's the utility bill or to get a liquor license, we check all the avenues of which someone should, owe us, or if they do owe us. And it does facilitate payment. In one of our commercial properties, the utility bill was paid because they were ready to apply for their liquor license. So we are very due diligent without the system right now to double check that and to make sure things are paid before we sign off on other, if it's a liquor license or if it's the transfer stamp. So we do look at those. I think because the system isn't fully built out yet, we're kind of revamping the work order system and some of the things we do. I don't believe they're connected yet, but I will put that on my list to follow up on.
And in that situation, maybe the business wasn't aware that they had outstanding fees in one area while they applied for another. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't. But I guess if they were all be able to show up on a statement, this business owes A, B, C, and D in these different columns, it might help in facilitating the timely payment of all of those items.
Yeah, so I think that's available on the customer self-service. Whether or not we rolled it out is what I'll have to look at, because that is kind of the point of it. You can go on there and see everything, so I'll have to see where we're at in rolling that out fully and if the customer number ties between the two.
Thank you.
That's a good idea.
Thank you, Alderman Budmats. Any other last questions or comments or concerns regarding the late fees and penalties and how we are going to resume standard? If not, then I want to thank everyone for your contributions on this evening's topics, and I'll look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, Alderman Sunoika. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Alderman McHale, for the second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. This meeting is adjourned at 8:59.